The laughter still echoes in my ears 3 months later. My parents, James and Patricia Morrison, actually laughed when the sheriff served me eviction papers at their front door. "Maybe this will teach you some responsibility, Serafina," Mom said, barely containing her glee. Dad nodded approvingly, arms crossed, like he was watching his finest parenting moment unfold. They had no idea they were about to witness the most expensive mistake of their lives. Before we dive into how I turned their smugness into complete devastation, I need to know where you're watching from today. If this story hits home about family betrayal and sweet justice, smash that like button, hit subscribe, because trust me, you will not want to miss how this family drama explodes. Ready to see how karma works when you underestimate the wrong daughter? Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. For 26 years, I believed I was the disappointment of the Morrison family. While my older brother Marcus got praised for his mediocre sales job, I was constantly criticized for my unstable career as a freelance financial consultant. Every family dinner became a lecture about how I needed to grow up and get a real job like Marcus. What they did not know was that my unstable career had made me incredibly wealthy. While they assumed I was struggling, I had been quietly building a portfolio worth over $2 million. I specialized in helping small businesses restructure their finances, and word-of-mouth referrals kept me booked solid. The irony was not lost on me that my parents, who constantly gave financial advice, were drowning in debt while lecturing their millionaire daughter about money management. The real revelation came 6 months before the eviction incident. I had been helping a client investigate suspicious financial activity in his company when I stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. The embezzlement trail led directly to Morrison Financial Services, my father's accounting firm. But it was not Dad who was stealing. It was Marcus. I spent weeks digging deeper, using my access to financial databases and my expertise in forensic accounting. What I discovered was a systematic scheme that had been running for 3 years. Marcus had been siphoning money from Dad's clients, manipulating records and covering his tracks by blaming missing funds on market fluctuations and administrative errors. The total amount exceeded $400,000. But here is where it gets worse. When I traced the money, I found that Marcus had not just been stealing from random clients. He had specifically targeted elderly clients who trusted the Morrison name. Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez, an 83-year-old widow, had lost her entire retirement fund. Mr. Robert Kim, a veteran with Alzheimer's, had been systematically drained of his disability benefits. Marcus had stolen Christmas from children, medical treatments from the sick, and dignity from the elderly. The most heartbreaking case was the Johnsons, a couple in their 70s who had saved for 40 years to buy their dream retirement home. Marcus had convinced them to invest their savings in a guaranteed return scheme that existed only on falsified documents. When they lost everything they had to sell their house and move in with their adult children, Mrs. Johnson called our family office, crying, begging for help, and I watched Marcus lie to her face, promising to look into it, while knowing exactly where her money had gone. I knew I had to tell my parents. Despite our complicated relationship, I assumed they would be horrified and demand justice for their clients. I prepared a comprehensive report complete with bank records, forged documents, and a timeline of the thefts. I requested a family meeting, emphasizing its urgency. That Sunday dinner turned into the most devastating conversation of my life. I laid out the evidence, methodically explaining how Marcus had betrayed their clients' trust and destroyed innocent lives. I expected shock, anger, immediate action to make things right. Instead, my mother looked at the documents and said, "Serafina, you have always been jealous of your brother's success. This is a new low, even for you." My father took the papers, glanced at them briefly, and declared, "These could be fabricated by anyone with a computer. You clearly do not understand how complex financial transactions work." But the worst part came when Marcus walked in halfway through my presentation. I watched my parents' faces as they chose their side before he even sat down. Mom immediately embraced him and said, "Your sister is trying to cause trouble for you again, honey." Dad handed him my evidence and said, Marcus, can you explain these discrepancies to your sister so she will stop embarrassing herself? Marcus looked through my findings with a calm that chilled me to the bone. He had clearly been preparing for this moment. With practiced ease, he explained away each piece of evidence. The suspicious transfers were authorized investment reallocations. The forged signatures were digital processing artifacts. The missing money was temporarily allocated to high-yield accounts pending client approval. My parents ate up every word. They were so invested in the narrative of Marcus as the golden child, and me as the family screw-up that they could not see the truth when it was documented in black and white. When I pressed harder, showing them Mrs. Vasquez's empty account and the forged documents with obvious inconsistencies, Dad became angry. Serafina, you need to stop this vendetta against your brother. You are making serious accusations without understanding the complexity of our business. Mom chimed in with, maybe if you had gone to business school like Marcus, instead of playing around with numbers as a hobby, you would understand legitimate financial practices. The conversation ended with them demanding I apologize to Marcus for slandering his professional reputation. When I refused, they told me I was no longer welcome at family gatherings until I could learn to support my brother instead of tearing him down. I walked out of that house knowing my family had chosen money and reputation over justice. They had chosen to protect a thief rather than defend his victims. That night, I sat in my car outside their house and made a decision that would change all our lives forever. I was going to expose Marcus and make sure every penny was returned to his victims. But first, I was going to teach my parents exactly what it costs to choose loyalty over justice. The plan I developed over the next 4 months was not just about exposing Marcus. It was about ensuring my parents could never again claim ignorance or dismiss the evidence. I needed to create a situation where the truth would be undeniable, public, and impossible to explain away. My first move was to contact every single victim independently. Using my professional reputation and credentials, I approached them as a concerned financial consultant who had discovered irregularities. I offered free forensic accounting services to help them understand what had happened to their money. The response was overwhelming and heartbreaking. Mrs. Vasquez invited me to her tiny studio apartment, the only place she could afford after losing her life savings. She showed me photographs of the house she had planned to buy the grandchildren she could no longer afford to visit, the medications she was rationing because of the financial strain. I trusted them because they were family people, she told me through tears. I thought the Morrison name meant something. Mr. Kim's daughter, Sarah, was furious when I explained how her father's disability benefits had been systematically stolen. Dad does not even understand what happened, she said. He just knows he cannot afford his memory care facility anymore. We had to move him to a state-run place with a 2-year waiting list for basic services. The Johnsons were the most devastating case. Mr. Johnson had developed depression after losing their savings, and Mrs. Johnson had become his full-time caregiver while working part-time at a grocery store to make ends meet. We worked our whole lives for that retirement, she said. 40 years of saving every penny, and now we have nothing. I documented every story, every impact, every sleepless night these families had endured because of Marcus's greed. But documentation alone would not be enough. I needed irrefutable proof that my parents knew about the thefts and chose to cover them up. This is where my expertise in financial forensics became crucial. I discovered that Marcus had not been working alone. The scheme required access to client files, signature authorization, and accounting systems that only my father could approve. When I traced the digital footprints, I found that Dad's administrative credentials had been used to authorize several of the fraudulent transactions. Initially, I thought Marcus had stolen Dad's passwords, but then I found email communications between them discussing client account optimizations and temporary reallocations pending market improvements. The timestamps showed these emails were sent after I had already presented my evidence to the family. My parents had not just dismissed my concerns, they had actively participated in covering up the crimes. The smoking gun came when I discovered a secret bank account that had been opened 3 months after my initial family meeting. The account was in my mother's maiden name, and it contained over $60,000 transferred directly from Marcus's illegal activities. My parents were not just enablers, they were beneficiaries. Armed with this evidence, I contacted the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. Agent Jennifer Rodriguez listened to my presentation with growing amazement. This level of systematic fraud involving elderly victims and family complicity triggers multiple federal charges, she explained. We are talking about wire fraud, elder abuse conspiracy, and money laundering. But Agent Rodriguez also warned me about the challenges ahead. Family financial crimes are complicated to prosecute because juries sympathize with family loyalty. Your parents will claim they were manipulated or misled. Marcus will probably blame everything on misunderstandings or your vindictive accusations. You need to be prepared for them to turn this into a public battle where you become the villain. That conversation crystallized my strategy. If my family wanted to make this about loyalty versus justice, I would give them exactly that choice in the most public way possible. I would force them to choose their side in front of everyone who mattered to them, their clients, their community, their church, their social circle. I started by contacting the local business journal that had featured Morrison Financial Services in multiple articles about family-owned businesses built on trust and integrity. I provided them with a comprehensive breakdown of the fraud, the victim impact statements, and the evidence of parental complicity. The reporter, David Martinez, was initially skeptical until he interviewed the victims himself. This is not just a financial crime story, David told me after meeting the Johnsons. This is about how institutional trust gets weaponized against the most vulnerable people in our community. Your family built their reputation on integrity, then used that reputation to facilitate elder abuse. The article was scheduled to publish in 3 weeks' time to coincide with the FBI investigation becoming public. But I had one more strategic move that would ensure maximum impact. I discovered that Morrison Financial Services was hosting their annual client appreciation dinner the same week the story would break. This event was their biggest marketing opportunity of the year, attended by over 200 clients, community leaders, and potential business partners. My parents had been planning it for months, expecting to announce their most successful year ever. Using my connections in the business community, I arranged for several of Marcus's victims to attend the dinner. Mrs. Vasquez, the Johnsons, and 5 other elderly clients would be seated at tables throughout the venue. They would attend as honored guests, not knowing what was planned, but positioned to witness my family's public confrontation with the truth. The FBI agreed to coordinate their arrests to happen during the dinner, maximizing the public impact and ensuring that everyone who had trusted the Morrison name would see justice being served in real time. 3 days before the dinner, I received an unexpected phone call from my father. His voice was strained, almost panicked. "Serafina, we need to talk. There have been some allegations made against the firm, and we need to discuss how to handle this as a family." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. He still thought this could be managed, contained, explained away. He still believed that family loyalty would override justice for his victims. "Dad," I said calmly, "there is nothing left to discuss. You made your choice 6 months ago when I brought you evidence of Marcus's crimes. You chose to protect a thief instead of his victims. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice." The silence on the phone stretched for nearly a minute. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. "What have you done, Serafina? I have done what you should have done the moment you learned the truth. I chose justice over family loyalty. And tomorrow night, everyone will see exactly what the Morrison name really means." The morning of the client appreciation dinner, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. The first call was from Marcus, his voice tight, with barely controlled panic. "Serafina, I do not know what game you are playing, but you need to stop this immediately." You are going to destroy our entire family over some misunderstanding. I let him talk for 3 minutes before responding. Marcus, there is no misunderstanding. I have copies of every forged document, every illegal transfer, every lie you told to cover your tracks. The only thing I am destroying is the illusion that our family stands for integrity. The second call came from my mother, who had clearly been crying. Honey, please, we can work this out as a family. Your father made some mistakes in trusting Marcus, but we can fix this privately. You do not need to humiliate us publicly. This conversation revealed something crucial that I had not anticipated. My parents were not just complicit, they were terrified. They had been living with the knowledge of Marcus's crimes for months, probably losing sleep and constantly worrying about discovery. My evidence had not been dismissed because they did not believe it. It had been dismissed because they were desperately hoping it would go away. But it was the third call that changed everything. Agent Rodriguez called to inform me that Marcus had contacted the FBI, directly claiming that I was the actual embezzler and that he had been trying to investigate my crimes when I preemptively accused him. He is claiming that your forensic accounting business is a front for money laundering and that you fabricated evidence to frame him when he discovered your activities. This development was both predictable and infuriating. Marcus was doing exactly what I had expected, turning the family's faith in him against me while positioning himself as the real victim. But Agent Rodriguez had good news as well. His story has significant holes, and we have verification of your legitimate business activities going back 5 years. More importantly, we executed search warrants this morning on both his apartment and your parents' home. The evidence we found corroborates everything you provided us. The search warrants had uncovered the secret bank account documents in my mother's bedroom, along with handwritten notes detailing how to distribute the stolen money without triggering federal reporting requirements. They had also found Marcus's personal records, including spreadsheets tracking which clients had been targeted and detailed plans for covering up the missing funds. But the most damning discovery was a recorded phone conversation between Marcus and my father, discussing how to handle the Serafina problem. In the recording, Dad clearly states, "We cannot let her destroy everything we have built over some old people who will not even miss the money." The recording was dated 2 days after my initial family meeting, proving that they had known about the crimes and actively conspired to cover them up. With the FBI evidence secured, I turned my attention to building the coalition that would ensure justice for the victims. This was where my professional network became invaluable. I had spent 6 years building relationships with attorneys, financial advisors, and community advocates who specialized in elder abuse cases. Attorney Michelle Santos agreed to represent the victims in a class action lawsuit against Morrison Financial Services. "This case has everything we need," she explained during our strategy meeting. "Clear documentation of financial elder abuse, evidence of institutional fraud, and a pattern of targeting vulnerable populations. We can not only recover their stolen money, but also secure punitive damages that will send a message to other potential fraudsters." I also contacted the State Board of Accountancy to file formal complaints against both my father's CPA license and the firm's operating permits. Board investigator Thomas Way was amazed by the comprehensive nature of the evidence. "In 20 years of investigating financial misconduct, I have never seen such thorough documentation of systematic fraud. This will result in permanent license revocation and significant financial penalties." But building the legal coalition was only half the battle. I needed community support to ensure that the public exposure would be complete and lasting. This is where Mrs. Vasquez became an unexpected ally and the hero of this entire story. Despite being the victim who had lost the most money, Mrs. Vasquez was determined to ensure that no other elderly person would suffer the same fate. She contacted every senior center, retirement community, and church group in our area to warn them about the Morrison firm. But more than that, she began organizing the other victims to speak publicly about their experiences. "I am 83 years old," she told me during one of our planning sessions. I do not have time to be embarrassed or scared. If telling my story prevents one other family from losing their life savings, then Marcus Morrison and his family deserve every bit of shame that comes their way. Mrs. Vasquez convinced 12 other victims to attend the client appreciation dinner as a group. They would arrive together, sit together, and when the arrests happened, they would stand together to ensure that everyone present understood exactly who had been harmed by the Morrison family's crimes. The afternoon before the dinner, I received an unexpected call from someone I had never heard of before. Dr. Rebecca Singh introduced herself as a former client of Morrison Financial Services who had left the firm 6 months earlier after discovering irregularities in her account management. I was not stolen from directly, Dr. Singh explained, but I noticed that Marcus was pressuring me to move my accounts to investments that did not make financial sense. When I questioned him, he became evasive and defensive. I transferred my portfolio to another firm, but I always wondered if I had dodged a bullet. Dr. Singh's testimony was crucial because it established a pattern of Marcus targeting high-value clients for manipulation, even when he ultimately failed to defraud them. But more importantly, she had contacts throughout the medical community who trusted her judgment about financial matters. If you are planning to expose this publicly, I want to help, she said. I can ensure that every doctor, dentist, and medical professional in this city knows what the Morrison firm really is. Medical professionals are often targeted by financial fraudsters because we have high incomes but limited time to monitor our investments closely. By the evening before the client dinner, I had assembled a coalition that included the FBI, state regulators, victim advocates, community leaders, and professional networks that would ensure the Morrison name would never be trusted with anyone's money again. But I also realized that this public exposure would irrevocably change my relationship with my parents and Marcus forever. That night, I sat in my apartment looking at family photos from before this nightmare began. Despite everything they had done, I still loved my parents. I still remembered Dad teaching me to balance a checkbook when I was 12. Mom bragging about my grades to her friends, family vacations, where we actually enjoyed each other's company. But I also thought about Mrs. Vasquez rationing her medications. Mr. Kim, confused and scared, in an underfunded state facility, the Johnsons working retail jobs in their 70s, because their retirement had been stolen. My family had made their choice when they prioritized reputation over justice. Now, they would live with the consequences of that choice forever. At exactly 11 p.m., I received a text from Agent Rodriguez. Everything is in place for tomorrow night. Are you ready for this? I typed back. Justice does not wait for family approval. The client appreciation dinner was set to begin at 7 p.m. on Friday evening at the Grand Ballroom of the Riverside Hotel. By 6:30, I was positioned in the hotel lobby, watching as Morrison Financial Services clients arrived in their finest attire, completely unaware that they were about to witness the destruction of everything they had trusted. Mrs. Vasquez arrived first, wearing a navy blue dress that she had borrowed from her neighbor because she could no longer afford formal clothing. She walked with quiet dignity, accompanied by the Johnsons and 8 other victims who had agreed to attend. Watching these elderly people prepare to face their financial predators took more courage than I had ever witnessed. Agent Rodriguez and her team were stationed throughout the hotel, ready to execute the arrests once all the key players were present. The plan was simple. Allow my family to begin their presentation about their most successful year ever, then interrupt with the arrests and public exposure of their crimes. At 6:45, my phone buzzed with a text that made my blood run cold. It was from Dr. Rebecca Singh. Serafina, I need to see you immediately. Something has gone wrong with tonight's plan. I found Dr. Singh in the hotel's coffee shop, her face pale and her hands shaking. When she saw me, she immediately pulled me into a corner booth away from other patrons. "Marcus contacted me 2 hours ago," she said in a whisper. "He knows about tonight. He knows about the FBI, the arrests, everything. Someone told him exactly what was planned." My stomach dropped. "What exactly did he say to you?" "He said that you had manipulated me and the other victims into participating in an elaborate scheme to destroy your family's business because you were jealous of his success. He said the FBI investigation was based on fabricated evidence that you created using your forensic accounting skills." But then Dr. Singh delivered the news that nearly shattered everything I had worked for. "Marcus showed me documents that appeared to prove you had embezzled money from your own clients to frame him. Bank records, forged emails, transaction histories that made it look like you were the real criminal. Serafina, the evidence looked completely authentic." I felt the room spinning around me. Marcus had not just prepared a defense, he had created a counteroffensive designed to destroy my credibility and turn me into the villain. But how had he obtained information about tonight's operation? "Dr. Singh, did you tell anyone about our conversation yesterday? Did you mention the FBI investigation or the planned arrests?" Her face flushed with embarrassment. "I mentioned it to my business partner, Dr. Andrew Morrison. I thought he should know about potential fraud in our professional community." She paused, realization dawning on her face. "Oh God, Morrison! Andrew Morrison! Is he related to your family?" The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Dr. Andrew Morrison was Marcus's cousin, a successful plastic surgeon who had always been close to our family. Dr. Singh had unknowingly revealed our entire strategy to someone who would immediately warn Marcus. "Serafina, I am so sorry. I had no idea he was connected to your family." When Marcus contacted me with those documents, Andrew was with him. "They said you were having a mental breakdown and that you were trying to destroy innocent people." I looked at Dr. Singh and realized she was no longer an ally. The fabricated evidence had convinced her that I was the real criminal. Marcus had successfully turned one of my key supporters against me, and worse, he had advance warning of everything we had planned. I immediately called Agent Rodriguez, but the news got even worse. "Marcus and your parents are not at the hotel," she informed me. "We have agents positioned at their homes, but it appears they have left town. We also received a complaint this afternoon alleging that you have been embezzling money from your clients to fund a vendetta against your family." The complaint had been filed by Dr. Andrew Morrison, who provided sworn testimony that Dr. Singh had told him about my confession of financial crimes. The fabricated documents Marcus had shown them were compelling enough that the FBI was required to investigate the allegations against me before proceeding with the original arrest plan. "Agent Rodriguez, this is exactly what I warned you would happen. Marcus is using family connections and fabricated evidence to make me look like the criminal." "I believe you, Serafina, but my hands are tied until we can verify that the documents against you are falsified. That process will take at least 48 hours, which means your family has time to disappear or destroy additional evidence." Standing in that hotel lobby, watching the victims who had trusted me prepare for a confrontation that would not happen, I felt like I had failed everyone who was counting on me for justice. Mrs. Vasquez approached me with a hopeful smile, asking if it was time to go into the ballroom, and I had to tell her that our plans had fallen apart. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of disappointment or anger, Mrs. Vasquez grabbed my hand and said, "Mija, do you think this is the first time powerful people have tried to escape justice by blaming their victims? We have been fighting bullies our whole lives. One setback does not mean we give up." The other victims gathered around us, and I realized that while I had lost the element of surprise, I had not lost their trust. "Mr." Kim's daughter Sarah spoke up. "My father may not understand what happened to his money, but I do. If the people who stole from him think they can run away and hide, they obviously do not know what family really means." The Johnson couple, despite being in their 70s, were equally determined. "We have been married for 52 years. Mrs. Johnson said. "We have survived job losses, medical emergencies, and family betrayals before. We are not about to let some coward who steals from old people get the last word." That night, instead of witnessing arrests, we held an impromptu press conference in the hotel ballroom. David Martinez from the Business Journal was there along with reporters from 3 local news stations who had been alerted about the planned arrests. Mrs. Vasquez became the spokesperson for all the victims, describing in detail how the Morrison family had stolen their life savings and then attempted to discredit the person who exposed their crimes. The press conference was broadcast live on local news, ensuring that even though Marcus had escaped immediate arrest, the entire community knew exactly what the Morrison name represented. But as I drove home that night, I realized that Marcus's counterattack had been more effective than I had anticipated. The fabricated evidence against me was sophisticated enough that it would take time to disprove, and during that time, my family could continue to position themselves as the real victims of my vindictive lies. I had won the battle for public opinion, but I was losing the war for legal justice. The next 72 hours were the most challenging of my entire life. While the FBI worked to authenticate the documents Marcus had fabricated against me, my family launched a comprehensive public relations campaign designed to paint me as a mentally unstable woman who had fabricated an elaborate fraud scheme to destroy my successful brother. They hired Patterson Public Relations, a crisis management firm that specialized in protecting white-collar criminals from prosecution. Within 24 hours of the failed arrest operation, local media was flooded with statements about my history of jealousy toward Marcus, my unstable career as a freelance consultant, and my documented pattern of making false accusations against family members. The most damaging attack came when they released medical records from my teenage years when I had been treated for anxiety and depression following my grandmother's death. Patterson Public Relations spun this into evidence that I was currently having a psychological break that had led me to create elaborate fantasies about family financial crimes. Dr. Andrew Morrison appeared on 3 local news programs describing me as a troubled individual who had manipulated elderly victims into believing they had been defrauded. He claimed that the missing money from client accounts was actually the result of market downturns and administrative delays, and that I had exploited these normal fluctuations to support my delusional accusations. For a moment, the strategy seemed to be working. 2 of the elderly victims called to say they were no longer certain about participating in legal action against my family. The Business Journal reporter David Martinez was pressured by his editor to balance his coverage by including more of Marcus's claims about my mental state. But then, something extraordinary happened that would ultimately destroy my family's credibility forever. Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez had been quietly conducting her own investigation while the FBI worked to verify evidence. Using skills she had developed during 40 years as a school librarian, she had been meticulously documenting every interaction she had ever had with Morrison Financial Services. "When you reach my age," she explained during a meeting at her apartment, "you learn to keep records of everything important because people assume you do not remember things clearly." Mrs. Vasquez had kept copies of every document Marcus had given her, every email exchange, every phone call summary, and most importantly, every promise he had made about her investments. But her most crucial discovery came when she found a recording she had made of a conversation with Marcus 3 months before I had exposed his crimes. "I recorded it because my granddaughter was worried about me being taken advantage of by financial scammers," she explained. "I wanted to have proof that I was being careful with my money." The recording was devastating. In it, Marcus clearly explained to Mrs. Vasquez that her retirement funds were being temporarily relocated to higher-yield investments that would guarantee better returns within 6 months. He specifically told her not to worry about statements showing zero balances because the money is working harder for you in accounts that do not appear on regular statements. But the most damning part of the recording came when Mrs. Vasquez asked about getting her money back quickly if she had a medical emergency. Marcus responded, "Mrs. Vasquez, at your age, you should be thinking about legacy planning rather than short-term access to funds. These investments are designed for people who understand long-term wealth building." The recording proved several crucial points that demolished Marcus's defense strategy. First, he had specifically targeted Mrs. Vasquez because of her age, making condescending assumptions about her financial sophistication. Second, he had lied about the nature of the investments, claiming the money was in legitimate accounts when it had actually been stolen. Third, he had discouraged her from monitoring her accounts, suggesting this was normal practice rather than an attempt to hide theft. Agent Rodriguez was ecstatic when Mrs. Vasquez provided the recording. "This single piece of evidence destroys every defense strategy they have attempted. Marcus cannot claim this was a misunderstanding or administrative error when we have him on tape lying directly to the victim." But Mrs. Vasquez was not finished. She had also discovered that Dr. Andrew Morrison was not just Marcus's cousin. He was a client whose own investments had been protected while other clients were being defrauded. Bank records showed that when Marcus was stealing from elderly clients, he was simultaneously ensuring that Dr. Morrison's portfolio grew significantly through legitimate investments. Andrew Morrison knew exactly what was happening, Mrs. Vasquez explained. He was not just defending family, he was protecting his own financial gains from his cousin's crimes. This revelation led to the discovery of a broader conspiracy. Marcus had been selectively protecting certain clients, family members, wealthy professionals, and influential community leaders, while exclusively targeting elderly clients and people without strong professional networks. This pattern proved that the thefts were not opportunistic crimes, but calculated targeting of vulnerable victims. Armed with Mrs. Vasquez's evidence, Agent Rodriguez was able to secure additional search warrants for Dr. Morrison's financial records and communications with Marcus. What they found was a smoking gun that destroyed any remaining credibility my family might have had. Text messages between Marcus and Dr. Morrison, dating back 18 months, showed detailed discussions about which clients were safe targets and which ones needed to be kept happy to maintain the family reputation. Dr. Morrison had specifically recommended elderly clients who would not be believed if they complained and would not live long enough to pursue lengthy legal battles. The most horrifying message came from Marcus to Dr. Morrison 6 months before my initial investigation. "The Vasquez situation is getting handled. Old lady memory plus complex financial explanations equals problem solved. Dad and Mom are on board with the strategy." This message proved that my parents had been actively involved in targeting Mrs. Vasquez specifically, and that they had been planning the cover-up long before I discovered the crimes. It also showed that their dismissal of my evidence had not been based on disbelief. It had been part of a calculated strategy to protect Marcus while continuing to exploit vulnerable victims. The FBI executed new search warrants on Tuesday morning, 3 days after the failed arrest operation. This time, they were searching for evidence of conspiracy and elder abuse, not just financial fraud. What they discovered in Marcus's apartment changed the entire scope of the investigation. Hidden in a locked file cabinet were detailed profiles of over 50 elderly clients, including medical information, family situations, and psychological evaluations that Marcus had compiled to determine who would be the easiest targets. The files included notes like, "Lives alone, no close family," and early-stage dementia, very trusting, and recently widowed, vulnerable to authority figures. Agent Rodriguez called me with an update that felt like vindication and horror combined. "Serafina, what your brother was doing goes far beyond financial fraud. This was systematic elder abuse designed to target the most vulnerable people in your community. The evidence we have now supports charges that could result in 20 years in federal prison." But the investigation also revealed something that broke my heart completely. Among Marcus's files was a detailed psychological profile of me written in my father's handwriting. Dad had analyzed my personality, my relationship with the family, my professional skills, and my likely reactions to discovering the fraud. The profile concluded, Serafina will be the biggest threat to operation security. Recommend immediate discrediting strategy if she becomes suspicious. My own father had been planning to destroy my credibility from the beginning, knowing that my expertise in financial investigation made me the most dangerous person to their criminal enterprise. The family that had raised me loved me and claimed to want the best for me had been prepared to sacrifice my reputation and mental health to protect their crimes. That night, Mrs. Vasquez called to check on me after the new evidence had been released to the media. Mija, are you okay? I know this must be heartbreaking for you. Mrs. Vasquez, I am devastated that my family could do this to innocent people, but I am not sorry that we exposed them. You deserve justice, and now you are going to get it. We are all going to get justice, she corrected me. But more than that, we are going to make sure this never happens to anyone else. That is the real victory here. The final confrontation came exactly 1 week after the failed arrest operation. But this time, my family had nowhere to run and no more lies to tell. The FBI had tracked Marcus, my parents, and Dr. Andrew Morrison to a hotel in Phoenix, where they were apparently planning to flee to a country without extradition treaties to the United States. Agent Rodriguez called me at 6 a.m. on Tuesday morning with news that felt like winning the lottery and graduating college on the same day. We have them all in custody. Marcus, your parents, and Dr. Morrison were arrested at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport with false passports and over $400,000 in cash. The attempted flight proved everything we had been saying about their guilt and their complete lack of remorse for the victims they had harmed. But more importantly, the discovery of the false passports and cash led to additional federal charges, including conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and attempting to flee prosecution. That afternoon, I drove to Mrs. Vasquez's apartment to deliver the news in person. When I knocked on her door, she answered wearing the biggest smile I had ever seen on her face. They got them, did they not? She said, before I could speak. I could tell by the way you are standing. Justice has a particular posture, and you are wearing it today. We sat in her tiny living room, and I explained everything that had happened. The arrests, the evidence, the charges that would ensure Marcus spent decades in federal prison while my parents faced significant jail time as co-conspirators. But Mrs. Vasquez surprised me with her reaction. Instead of celebration or satisfaction, she seemed thoughtful and almost sad. Serafina, I want you to know that I am grateful for everything you have done. You risked your family relationships to protect people you barely knew. But I also want you to know that the real victory is not about punishment. It is about prevention. She was right, and her wisdom shaped how I would spend the next phase of my life. Over the following months, while my family faced trial and eventual conviction, I worked with Mrs. Vasquez and the other victims to create something positive from our shared trauma. We established the Elder Financial Protection Initiative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating elderly people about financial fraud and providing free forensic accounting services to victims of financial abuse. Mrs. Vasquez became our first board president, bringing the combination of personal experience and natural leadership that made her perfect for the role. The organization grew rapidly as word spread throughout the community about our mission. Dr. Rebecca Singh, who had been manipulated by Marcus and Dr. Morrison, became one of our strongest supporters, helping us establish connections with medical professionals who could identify early signs of financial elder abuse. 6 months after the arrests, Morrison Financial Services was permanently shut down, and all client funds were recovered through asset seizures and insurance claims. Mrs. Vasquez got her retirement money back, the Johnsons were able to buy their dream house, and Mr. Kim was moved to a high-quality memory care facility paid for by the restitution settlement. But the most meaningful result came when Mrs. Vasquez decided to use part of her recovered retirement funds to establish a scholarship program for young people studying forensic accounting and elder advocacy. I want to make sure there are always people like you ready to fight for victims when their own families fail them. The trials were emotionally devastating, but ultimately satisfying. Marcus was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $3 million in restitution. My parents each received 6-year sentences and permanent bans from working in financial services. Dr. Andrew Morrison lost his medical license and received 4 years in prison for conspiracy and elder abuse. During the sentencing hearing, I was given the opportunity to make a victim impact statement. I had planned to talk about the betrayal, the lies, the systematic targeting of vulnerable people. Instead, I found myself talking about Mrs. Vasquez. Your Honor, my family's crimes were not just about money. They were about exploiting trust, targeting vulnerability, and choosing greed over human dignity. But this case has also shown me that real family is not about blood relations. It is about people who choose to protect and support each other. I looked directly at Mrs. Vasquez, who was sitting in the front row with the other victims who had become my chosen family. These people taught me that justice is not about revenge. It is about ensuring that vulnerable people are protected and that trust means something in our community. After the sentencing, Mrs. Vasquez approached me outside the courthouse. "Mija, are you going to be okay? I know this was your family despite everything they did." "Mrs. Vasquez, I lost a family that was built on lies and maintained through manipulation. But I gained a family that is built on truth and maintained through mutual respect. I think I got the better end of that deal." Today, 3 years later, the Elder Financial Protection Initiative has helped recover over $2 million for fraud victims and has prevented countless other schemes through education and early intervention. Mrs. Vasquez, now 86, still serves as our board president and continues to amaze me with her energy and dedication. I have built a new life surrounded by people who choose to support each other rather than exploit vulnerabilities. My forensic accounting business has grown into a firm that employs 12 people, all dedicated to protecting vulnerable populations from financial abuse. Sometimes, people ask me if I regret destroying my family to help strangers. But they have it backward. I did not destroy my family. My family destroyed themselves the moment they chose to steal from elderly victims and cover up their crimes. I simply chose justice over complicity, and in doing so, I found my real family among people who understand that protecting the vulnerable is more important than protecting reputation. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what is right? How do you handle situations where the people closest to you disappoint you in fundamental ways? Share your stories in the comments, because your experiences might help someone else who is facing similar difficult choices. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about justice, family dynamics, and standing up for what is right. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to hold them accountable for their actions. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting content that highlights the importance of protecting vulnerable people in our communities. Remember that real family loyalty means preventing harm, not enabling it. Until next time, keep choosing justice over convenience, truth over comfort, and courage over compliance.